of the Oklahoma School Board, and it's high time that that situation was reversed and we developed a proper immunity to it and made sure that religion could only be self-inflicted. Thank you.
Dr. Donohue will now question Mr. Hitchens for 4 minutes.
I think I know why you don't like Mother Teresa, but I think you really should be man enough to tell the audience some of your more despicable comments. So since you weren't, I'll do it for you. These are Christopher Hitchens' word. Mother Teresa, in regard to her opposition to abortion, he said, quote, "It sounds grotesque when uttered by an elderly virgin." She has also been regarded as a presumable virgin, and you've also referred to as an elderly virgins terrified of sex should not tell the rest of us how to live our sex lives. So that's really the kind of individual you are, Christopher, so don't give me the stuff about Duvalier. Now, why is she such a threat to you? All right. You see, both Christopher Hitchens and Mother Teresa had one thing in common. They both professed to have something in common with regard to the poor. They both said they were concerned about the poor. Unlike Mr. Hitchens, Mother Teresa actually did something about the poor. So she... Well, what's bothering him is that here's a woman engaged in private philanthropy, grounded in her Catholic tradition, and you, sir, you want state socialism. That is why she terrifies you, and she continues to terrify you. You want coercion, and Mother Teresa, of course, chose altruism. You know, if you're going to write a book, too, you really have to do it in a scholarly fashion. For example, this is a scholarly work. This is a book which I wrote, okay? This is a piece of trash. This is a book which you wrote. Now, why would I say that? This is the Mother Teresa book, not because of the content. He has the freedom of speech. When you write a book, if you're going to be taken seriously, it's always helpful to have an index, okay? You don't have any index. Yours is 8.5 by 5.5, 98 pages. But more importantly, there's something called footnotes, which go at the foot of the page, or endnotes, which go at the end of the chapter. If you take a look at my book, you have 1,060 attributions. It's called evidence, Christopher, and we open up your book and we don't find any. Now that, you see, if you were one of my undergraduate students, that would have to merit an F. I'm sorry. It doesn't carry any weight. You know, the reason why you really don't like Mother Teresa, you say she takes from the rich in your book, and she gives from the poor. Well, who the hell did you expect her to take it from? The poor? I mean, what kind of a mentality is this, you know? She visits dictatorships, so does the Red Cross. And what do you have against dictatorships anyhow, sir? You have been in love with the Marxists all over Latin America. To give you an idea of where he's coming from, he was so angry at Mother Teresa because she wouldn't install an elevator in one of her buildings to rescue the homeless in the Bronx. He didn't mention that she agreed to take them up the stairs. The nuns would carry the homeless up the stairs. No, because the mind of the bureaucrat, the person who must have the state, is the mind of the person who would be against anybody who's doing anything like this. It's called voluntarism. But most amazing, in your book, you say that Calcutta needs population control. But on the page before, you actually say that secular leftist politics predominates. Didn't you quite figure out the cause and effect? In social science, it's called an independent variable and a dependent variable. Didn't you quite figure out that the reason they have so much poverty over there is precisely because of your secular leftist politics, which predominates? Where in God's name has socialism ever delivered anything but what Orwell said? Leader worship, oppression, and war. That's the legacy of what you stand for.
Thank you, Dr. Donohue. Mr. Hitchens will now question Dr. Donohue for 4 minutes.
Oh, I see. I didn't want it to be... I thought that was a question. Can questions take that form? If questions can take that form, I can question Mr. Donohue for longer than 4 minutes, believe you me. I think I'm obliged, am I not, to reply to what was just said of me? Yes, you may. It would be unmanly, to borrow a term from Dr. Donohue, not to do so. Well, it's hardly to convict me of skulking to say you don't have the nerve to say what you then quote from my own book as having said. So that's my first point. I mean, I suppose I do hide behind my own publication and my own byline. If I didn't quote myself, I at least didn't repeat your error, sir, of solipsism. But I can't have it said of even of the Red Cross, which I hold no brief, that they take money from dictators. I'm sorry, the Red Cross does not go to dictators and ask for money. What Mother Teresa in fact did was to go to Haiti during the rule of the Duvalier family to take money from the Duvaliers, which the Duvaliers had stolen from the poor. You will remember that the life of the poor in Haiti was notoriously hard, and to make a speech in which she said that the Duvalier family was loved by the poor in Haiti, and that as far as she could see, the poor in Haiti loved them back. Now that's what she actually did and what she actually said. And you can square that as you will with her claim to be a saint. I don't trespass on sainthood questions. It's none of my affair. But those are the facts. Again, with Charles Keating of the Lincoln Savings and Loan, who had fleeced the poor of California through a Ponzi scheme, she took a large sum of money from him and a private plane, and the use of a private plane, and when asked by the court in California to return the stolen money, said no, or rather didn't reply, having interceded in the court to say that Mr. Charles Keating was a good man and a friend of the poor. Again, these are the facts. Now, it was not said by Mother Teresa. I'll say this much for her. She didn't say, but some of her apologists did say, well, Jesus of Nazareth knocked around with some pretty bad characters too. Sinners, publicans, tax collectors, that sort of type. Whores as well. No one accuses Mother Teresa of knocking around with that kind of type, and as far as I know, she never did. But he wasn't, if he was a real person, he wasn't shaking them down for their money. So the analogy, even if I accept the grammar or morality of it, would not hold. Mother Teresa took stolen money from the rich, money they had stolen from the poor, and she spent it on, well, we don't actually know what, because there was no audit. But we know it wasn't on hospices and on healthcare and feeding people in Calcutta, because that remained consistent. Her outfit was as poor when she finished as when she started. What we think is it went to the 300 convents she claimed to have built around the world. In other words, it went to an order that will bear her name, and to the greater glory of Mother Teresa. Well, that's fine, also, and not my business, but it's not the impression under which the money was given to her, is it? And finally, she was not a friend of the poor, but a friend of poverty. It's a very important distinction. Everybody knows that there is one way, and only one way, by which poverty can be cured. It involves the empowerment, as to use I'm sorry for the fashionable catchphrase, but there's no better word for it, the empowerment of women. Go to a village in Bolivia and Bangladesh, anywhere you like, any wooden spoon country you choose. Give women some power and education where their reproduction and reproductive rate is concerned, and come back a year or two later and you will see the floor has moved up a little bit away from the swamp of ignorance and filth and superstition and infant mortality and disease, and things are starting to happen. And then if you can come up with maybe a handful of seeds and a small loan, things will really start to happen. But it all depends on releasing women from their dependence on the cycle of reproduction and on the husbands who force it on them and the conditions that force it on them. Mother Teresa spent her entire life in the Third World opposing any vestige of the only policy that can possibly work. She deserves to be called a friend of poverty, and she preached to the poor that their poverty was to be loved and thought of as a gift from God, that their sufferings were a gift. And she preached to women that in Ireland, for example, one of the last acts of her life, to go to Ireland to campaign against the constitutional ban on divorce that's since been lifted by an all-party agreement. She campaigned solidly in the no referendum to say, no, a woman in Ireland who's married to a drunken alcoholic, a child abuser and wife beater may never hope to be divorced and remarried, and the Constitution of Ireland will tell this to Protestants too, because the Constitution was then applied to the whole of Ireland, and thus making peace between the two communities entirely impossible. And then in her interview with the Ladies' Home Journal said about her friend and fellow campaigner, Princess Diana, the spoiled narcissist princess of all time, that it was great that she'd got divorced because her marriage was so unhappy. This is, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, a return to the time of the sale of indulgences and the most disgraceful days of your church.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchens.
You take her, not me.
Dr. Donohue will now respond to Mr. Hitchens for 8 minutes.
8?
Charles Keating, by the way, gave the money to Mother Teresa back around 1982. You left that out. Very convenient. When he was involved in this swindle in the 1990s, the money was already spent on the poor. That does not appear in your book, and you're not man enough to say it again here this evening. Now, this fawning over the poor that you supposedly have, you should have an interest in the poor. It kind of reminds me of people who said that, when Jimmy Carter was a good president because he kept, after he left the presidency, he kept making houses for the poor. My response to that was, and the same response they have to you, well, hell, he ought to. He helped make enough of them poor in the first place. Why shouldn't he build some houses for them? I mean, after all, it is the philosophy of The Nation magazine, is yours is a Marxism. It is the most failed philosophy in all of history. You've been on the wrong side of history. Marxism is what is, you talk about apologies. You don't want to apologize for anything. There are more people dead in the 20th century as a result of what government has done than what any religion has done. 120 million people lost their lives. It's called communism. Now, if you don't make this... Christopher, you want to make the argument that somehow there's a distinction here, that you as a Marxist, as an intellectual, are somehow distant from the behavioral consequences of your philosophy. Well, it won't work. Remember what Solzhenitsyn said about Stalinism and Marxism? He said, Stalin didn't pervert Marxism, it perfected it. And that's exactly what happens. You cannot have a socialist regime without the kind of poverty which then people must, like Mother Teresa, have to rescue the people from. What you are doing is sponsoring an ideology which ultimately leads to the kind of oppression that you supposedly abhor. Now, you say that, that you're an atheist as such. Well, I hope that you will leave this hall tonight and explain to us then why you believe in the ape story. I mean, it's very important for me to know, for example, as I understand it, the way you believe it, is that once upon a time, there were apes up in a tree. And then the apes fell off the tree. They fell on all fours. And after millions of years, they stood up. And they lost most of their hair. And then, voila, there we were. Now, you know, if you want to believe that you are, if you want to believe that you are a descendant of the apes, you won't get any argument from me, Mr. Hitchens. You know, your little lecture about woman is rather misplaced, too. It's the people who practiced sexual libertine philosophy are the ones who are dead. Did you ever figure out that, for example, in 1989, when the gay thugs ran into St. Patrick's Cathedral, and they trashed the cathedral and spit the Eucharist on the floor, they had a kind of reunion here in December. There's almost none of them showed up. That's because they're dead. Now, why are people dead from sex? Is it because they are practicing natural sex, or are they practicing unnatural, promiscuous sex? Now, nobody that I know of in the entire world has ever died of sex if you listen to what the Catholic Church teaches. It's only people in rebellion to it. If you go throughout history, you'll see a whole long list of people, from the Marquis de Sade to Kinsey. Every one of these people, not only anti-Catholic, they were sadomasochists, bisexual, switch-hitting, pedophile, voyeuristic exhibitionists. Did I leave anybody out? Now, and that's true. If you take a look at every one of these people, look at what they have bequeathed to us. So I think there is some accounting that needs to be done. It has to come from your side. You said that the Catholic Church deserves the bigotry it gets because it wants to impose its views. I can take no better authority than Pope John Paul II, who says the Catholic Church doesn't want to impose anything. We are here to propose. You can accept and you can reject, and you can live with the consequences of those people who reject the wisdom of the Catholic Church. You know, it is strange. The Catholic Church is the greatest defender of the poor. I don't know of one single force which allows more poor people to become middle class than Catholic schools. And yet, if we lived in a sane society, if we lived in a sane society, we would close down the Department of Education and give every single dime to the Catholic Church to defend the poor. That's what we would do. But the government is too busy watching Catholic priests on Sunday. Are they talking about abortions? Meanwhile, we have the Protestants stumping in there, don't we? Have Gore and the others. And we have them getting endorsements in the Protestant churches. In 1988, you had two Protestants run for president, the Reverend Jesse Jackson and the Reverend Pat Robertson. Could you imagine if instead, in the year 2000, we announced that Father Paracone is going to run for president? But, oh, I'd like to give them Father Eichner out in Kellenberg. That's what I'd like to give them. And if I really want to stick it to them, I'll give them Monsignor John Woolsey. That's what I'll give them. Yeah. And if you want to push them way over the top, then I'll give you Wren. You ever meet Michael Wren? All right, let's run these guys for president. We'll have Father Frank here be the fundraiser. I mean, after all, if Gore can do it in the Buddhist temples and get away with it, why can't we? Can you imagine Jack Kemp in 1996 in St. Patrick's Cathedral taking up checks from the nuns and the priests? Everybody's writing a check, and then you get the money back from the Archdiocese of New York. Could you imagine trying to get away with this? Now, Christopher, you might agree with me on this, because you don't want the clergy to be running. I understand that. However, I think even you, because of your appetite for power, would find it irresistible if a particular clergyman came to you and said, Christopher, I need a vice presidential candidate. Will you please come with me? I could see this one person in this country that even you, Christopher, would have to say yes. Bob Jones III. Now, what a ticket we have. Jones and Hitchens for president. Could you see the buttons? Now, you could actually bring in your friend Ian Paisley, another guy from the other side of the country. I mean, Ian Paisley has a lot in common. He's not only a fellow Brit with him, but he's also a guy who got an honorary degree from Bob Jones University. So you'd have some fun with that. I'm sure you would. Yeah. You know, the hypocrisy that goes on with this thing is never ending, particularly with regard to the government. And I want you to talk to this question of the public subsidization of the government here. We had in Chicago in 1988, people went in and they took Mayor of Washington, put a portrait of him in the Chicago Institute, in underwear and the like. What did the Black City Council do? They ordered that the artwork be impounded. Do you know what happened last year, the year before, when the Los Angeles City Council, how many of you know this, they actually passed a resolution condemning a particular network for putting on a program, The Secret Diaries of Douglas Pfeiffer. Could you imagine if Donohue went to the New York City Council and say, hey guys, you want to pass a resolution condemning nothing sacred? I mean, they look at you like you were crazy. So what we have is a double standard. You don't like the double standard because you want to contribute to anti-Catholicism. At least you're on record about that. Well, that's one thing I have to say of Mr. Hitchens, because he's not a liberal. Liberals usually lie about these things. He will tell you right to your face that he believes that you should have more bigotry. But where you really break down, though, is that if you yourself were the victim of some sort of bigotry, you would be the first one to scream bloody murder. You, sir, want to have it both ways. You want to talk about the necessity of human rights. Meanwhile, every time you get a chance to undercut somebody who's fighting for human rights, you will do so. So that's what makes you the ultimate phony.
Thank you, Dr. Donohue. Mr. Hitchens will now have 8 minutes to respond to Dr. Donohue.
Actually, I hadn't quite got through with Mother Teresa, but I think probably Dr. Donohue, if I must call him that, will duly take any criticism of her as a reflection on his own probity. No, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not usually accused of being inaudible or understated. I'll start again. I was going to say I hadn't quite finished with Mother Teresa, but I'm sure that if I go on a little, it will. In rebuttal, it will, so to speak, feed into Dr. Donohue's rebuttal of me. Let's put a case where I think that the Church has a claim to a certain moral grandeur. The Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, because many churches claim to be Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church takes the view that there can be no trifling with the life of the unborn, and that the concept unborn child is not a propaganda concept, but a meaningful one, a real one, a true one, and that deserves protection and tenderness. As it happens, I agree with this view for materialist reasons. It seems to me obvious from the discoveries of biology and embryology that the concept unborn child is a real one. It's not just a dialectical explanation. And it has to be granted to the Church that it has made this a centerpiece of its ethic and its morality. But just as I'm not, say, a pacifist, and I can certainly imagine circumstances in which human life can be taken, I don't think that there are non-fundamentalist positions on abortion. For example, one of them is that the IUD, the intrauterine contraceptive device, is in fact a murder weapon, an abortifacient murder weapon. I consider that to be an extreme view, I must say. I think there is the possibility of common ground to be found on this if such extreme positions are dropped. I also do not believe, and cannot really believe that anybody does believe, that what is sometimes called artificial contraception, in other words, medical or chemical contraception, is the moral equivalent of abortion, and thus that really all forms of contraception are murder also. So you have my reservations as well. Now take the position of Mother Teresa. She's given the Nobel Prize for Peace. She's never done anything for peace, never claimed to do anything for peace, and actually never said anything about it either, but she accepts the award. Another occasion, by the way, where I'd like to know where the money went, but never mind, you can't just take the money at Stockholm. You have to make a speech about, and it has to be about peace. And I have the speech, and Mother Teresa in that speech says, well, the greatest threat to world peace is abortion. Now, this is not a sensible view. It's an extreme view. It's a fanatical view. It's a fundamentalist and zealot view. One of the great achievements of your church used to be that it knew how to keep zealots and fanatics under control, that it was indeed a means of pacifying and disciplining that kind of force in society. But I'm afraid to say that with a great deal of secular and Protestant and Jewish help, this mad Catholic fundamentalist escaped and became a role model for the American media and for everyone in it, secular, Jewish, or Christian. And then, having witnessed this absurd rodomontade, the effective secular canonization of this woman who, as I say, was a friend of poverty, was a friend of dictatorship, was a friend of ignorance and superstition and fanaticism, and to see her adopted by the entire secular media and welcomed by all, I have to come here and explain why everyone's pounding on the Catholic Church. It's preposterous. There's no sense of proportion in this way of arguing. I'm sorry, Doctor, or I must say in the way you argue it. I'll accept as a joke what you said about Darwinism, and I'm sure you hope that everyone else was hoping, vulgarly though it was phrased, that it would be accepted in that way too. I don't think I can quite let go the idea that no one would be in any physical danger if they followed only the sexual precepts of the Church, and you'll have to forgive me here. Since the Church has and still does condemned even modest acts of lonely self-abuse and encouraged people, well, not enjoined them to abstain from them, it's quite clear that what you abstain from under church instruction is not going to kill you. I mean, I will grant you that, but I will also think you will have to admit that you are the father, if not the mother, of a gigantic tautology. Teaching of that kind, teaching about abstention, clearly cannot lead to death from sex. But to say that AIDS is death from sex is, I think, to commit an obscenity. I'm sorry to have to say that the brothers and sisters of our society who have succumbed to that appalling disease did not die of sex or of their sexuality. And remember, homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love. They died. That's interesting. I wondered what kind of a growl I might get there. Well, I'll repeat it then. Homosexuals practice not just a form of sex, but a form of love. If you can't live with it, I think you're the poorer. However, what they died of was a filthy virus which can and will be cured. And the clear implication of what Dr. Donohue said was that it was some kind of judgment on their sexual preference. I'm sorry I can't sit here, rather stand here, and take that. I'll give you an example which you, again, might think was extreme, but it's not. During the Reagan administration, there was a search for blood to do experiments to find out what's happening with AIDS. The search was to find blood that had no sexual transmitted disease contamination in it. In other words, the blood of people who'd never had any kind of disease. And I don't think you'll find, actually, that in the countries where Holy Mother Church rules, and where, by the way, it does make rules for non-believers on the accessibility and availability of contraception, where it can, and divorce, in Spain, in Italy, in Ireland. It's been tried many times, it's been defeated, but you've no right to say that the Church has not tried to legislate for non-believers. No right at all, that's a flat lie. And in many of these countries, syphilis and gonorrhea is not unknown, even among believers. I hate to break it to you, but to those of you who've been in confessionals probably know it already. So the search was on in America. Who has the cleanest blood? Who has the blood that is freest of all venereal trace for these experiments? the Department of Health went out to look for it. Well, there are two groups. One is nuns. I don't make nun jokes, never have. Resent the accusation that I do. One is nuns, the other is female homosexuals. Lesbians, as some of people, I think, like to call them, especially people who are slightly too interested in this subject, as I suspect Dr. Donohue of being. Well, there was a lesbian organization in San Francisco called Blood Sister, which agreed to give blood. It's pure, uncontaminated blood for this experiment, and a member of the Reagan administration, a junior member of it, went to a dinner to honor this group because, if you remember, AIDS was left to voluntary initiative. It wasn't a national health question or anything socialist or totalitarian like that. It was to be left up to volunteers, this plague. And for going to the dinner just to recognize women who'd given their pure blood to help their gay brothers, he was fired because he'd committed an immoral act and recognized an immoral practice. Well, this is why I don't think secular morality needs to be defended from the barbaric superstitions and guilts and obscene suggestions that are made by the godly, or from the repressions and unguessable motives that lie behind people who talk and think and sound like that. Thank you.
Dr. Donohue will now have 6 minutes for his closing statement.
You don't write jokes about nuns, you just write vicious things about them as you did about her virginity before. So that's right, you're in a different category. You know, the reason is that abortion is the greatest threat to world peace. I mean, if you understand who the most defenseless segment of the population is, Christopher, then you wouldn't have to have me try to explain it to you. If a woman can kill her child, she can kill anyone. And if men put up with it, and if men encourage it, who's next? You don't quite seem to get that, but that's for another day. The reason why Mother Teresa is loved by the media, and they don't particularly care for people who are socialist, is precisely because they recognize in her, as they recognize in the Holy Father, we're dealing with somebody very, very special. We're dealing with holy people, a concept which is obviously foreign to you. We have a situation with regard to the AIDS thing that I find is absolutely amazing. Did you think that you can win this argument? Did you think a little bug came along and bit these people in the behind, and that's why they wound up with AIDS? I mean, the time has come to really talk the truth here. If you drink too much, you will get cirrhosis of the liver. If you smoke too much, you will get lung cancer. And if you practice promiscuous sex, you will wind up with some type of VD. That's because the body cannot take that kind of punishment. There's something called the natural law. There's something called the natural order. You don't want to hear it, but it happens to be true. You know, I was on with Larry King myself, and they said, well, they're talking about AIDS. I said, well, I'm not going to get it, not unless I get one of these transfusions. And you know the reason why I'm not going to get it is because I don't sleep around, I don't practice anal sex, and I don't take drugs. So I'm not going to get it. Now, I feel sorry for people who get it, but you know what? There are people who are out there who know exactly what they're doing. If you had a group in Washington, D.C., which said, smokers of the world, unite. You get all the tobacco people in Washington demanding that we have more research for lung cancer and saying, you have no right to tell me to do what I want with my own body. I have every right to smoke cigarettes, but I demand that you find a cure for my malady. We'd look at them as if they were mad. But yet we find this with the gay population and with the straights who are also getting the results of what they do. Now, you and your secular morality, you know, there is something called the 10 Commandments. They're not recommendations, and that's because it speaks to human appetites. Thou shalt not, Christopher. It's written, the understanding here is that human nature on its own might in fact indulge in the passions and the appetites which lead to this kind of behavior. You know, the Catholic Church is hated. You know why? Because the Catholic Church speaks the truth. The Catholic Church talks about absolutes in a world of relativism. The Catholic Church knows what freedom is. The freedom is the right to do what you ought to do. In a culture where it says freedom is the right to do whatever we want to do. But no, you would rather be in bed with the deconstructionists. And so we found out what they think, don't we? That there is no such thing as truth. That's why people like DeMann can go on and teach at Yale University after collaborating with the Nazis. It's only a natural fit if you could only figure it out. Foucault, another one of your masters out of France, sadomasochist who wound up with AIDS and then intentionally spread it to people here. And of course, he got a job at the New School for Social Research, obviously where he would belong. So no, you've got to take a look at the consequences. You cannot just say we have an ideology here which means good and then take a look at the consequences as divorced from it. And that's exactly the kind of problem that I think that we have with you. In any event, listen, we've got some very good news here with the Catholic League. Despite your appetite to have us lose, we are winning. And I think that's the driving thing that's driving people mad. Not only you, Hitchens, but a lot of people in this country. If you take a look at the victories the Catholic League has had, it's astounding, isn't it? Take a look, for example, what happened tonight, if you got the news. I got a chance to be on with Peter Jennings here just about an hour or so ago. We've been fighting the Republicans and the bigots in the evangelical Protestant community who are out there to try and sunder a priest from getting the job as house chaplain. Well, as a matter of fact,